What's up YouTube? I recently watched two Warriors vs Heat games, and one of my biggest takeaways was why don't more teams utilize zone to disrupt the rhythm and flow of the opposing offense? After all, NBA offenses have gotten so good due to a combination of spacing, the use of analytics, rule changes, and of course players being more talented than ever. Even the best defenses know that the premier initiators in the league on most nights have little trouble carving up game plans by basically making preordained reads. A simple ball screen with the 5-man or the weakest link usually exposes whether or not the team will switch, drop, hedge, or trap. This is certainly an oversimplification, but the point is that great offensive players are generally making reads that almost feel like muscle memory against these coverages. That's where zone comes into play. Over the past few seasons, the use of zone defense has grown exponentially. For some context, in 2017-2018, the Mavericks used zone most frequently at just 3% of all their defensive possessions. So far this season, 12 different teams go zone more than 3% of the time, headlined by the Heat at 17%. The Heat are also just giving up 0.730 points per possession in these situations, which is stellar. In today's video, I want to break down some tape, highlight the strengths and weaknesses of zone defenses, point out some interesting observations, and figure out why more teams aren't doing this. Zones have been around forever, but it wasn't until the early 2000s when illegal defense rules were restructured that teams could do more than play man-to-man or send hard doubles. Loading up, playing the boxes and elbows, and the use of junk defenses were now allowed. One could argue this is the most important change to the NBA since the introduction of the shot clock and the three-point line. The first team I want to look at is the Heat, who play more zone than any team in the NBA. An interesting observation I found watching the Heat is they place their wings much higher up than you would normally see in a traditional 2-3 zone, and they love to stun at ball handlers and recover back to the corner. Miami's players do a really good job of being active and angling their bodies toward the sideline to disrupt passes to the corner. Weaker defenders can also hold up better in the corner, with both the baseline and sideline serving as an extra defender, and weaker ball handlers tend to be placed here. This season, several teams, including the Heat, are also showing a soft 2-2-1 press look before falling back into their 2-3. Making ball handlers work to get across takes precious time off the clock. Oftentimes, backcourt pressure disrupts a team's ability to get organized, and they end up getting stagnant. A contested 3 late in the clock is a win for the defense. Possessions like this, where the ball barely moves and a team settles from deep, are also a win. The Heat's communication, activity, and effort helps them keep the ball from even getting near the painted area. This is another form of rim protection. Here's another example of the Heat keeping the ball out of the middle, and when the ball eventually hits the high post, the Heat's defense adapts and begins to resemble a man-to-man look with such little time left on the clock. Zones can also be used on inbound situations. The Warriors often slip off-ball actions, and Draymond almost always finds them, but with Bam zoned up on the backside, the action is blown up. Speaking of the Warriors, mixing in zone was a big part of their title run last season. The Warriors mixed in quite a bit of 1-2-2 against the Mavs in last year's Western Conference Finals to protect their lesser defenders from having to guard Luka on an island. The zone really helped them shrink the floor. Here's an example where Steph is defending Luka on the wing, but the Warriors overload the strong side. Luka ends up skipping it across, and the Warriors defense will live with Reggie Bullock trying to make a play off the bounce. Playing zone isn't just effort, it's also intelligence. Zoning up in the NBA is harder due to defensive 3 seconds. Watch Draymond reset his 3-second timer by stepping in and out of the key and tagging cutters. When a drive does occur now, Draymond is in perfect position to contest. The Warriors also go zone on inbound situations, and Kevon Looney displays his intelligence by showing at the level of the screen, knowing Miami doesn't have much time left to get a quality shot. Here's another zone possession from the Warriors, and they get the Pistons late in the clock and in a scramble. Wiggins executes a flyby closeout here, which most coaches would advise you not to do. The NBA is a copycat league. Golden State is not the only team that does this. For years, Toronto also has used flyby closeouts to bother three-point shooters. Moving on, I want to shout out Half Court Hoops, a great basketball channel who inspired me to make this video. In that video, it details how the Blazers, a team that frequently goes zone, has been stellar in defending after timeout situations. After watching some tape, I've also noticed that the Blazers love to open up games and quarters with their 2-3 zone as well. As a coach myself, I can attest going zone in and out of timeouts, quarters, and after free throws is a great way to keep the offense guessing and disrupt a set they may have drawn up. So far, we've only looked at the strengths of zone, but to get a more complete look, let's talk about some of the weaknesses of going zone in the NBA. First off, rebounding out of zones can be very difficult. Zones often influence teams to take perimeter shots, and that leads to longer rebounds, which can be harder to track. Zones also tend to lead to many missed box outs because you are often in scramble situations without a designated matchup. Going zone too often can lead to giving up good looks in valuable areas. Teams are smart with creative movement and screening actions, and that puts defenders in tough spots. Both Miami and Portland frequent zone teams are both bottom 5 in the frequency of corner threes allowed. Lastly, like the man coverages, zone starts to get figured out. Phoenix, for example, has played Portland multiple times this season, and you see the power of scouting as Phoenix looks a lot more organized when the Blazers go zone, and they get a quality look out of this zone set. This is partially why zones can't be a full-time approach defensively. This isn't the college game or high school. NBA players are too advanced as passers, decision makers, and shooters for this to be your primary defense. Once players get comfortable against it, you will get picked apart. I do want to note that basic zones are not the only way to keep teams guessing. It's a joy to watch coaches like Nick Nurse, who's not afraid to experiment with junk defenses or presses. Of course, everyone remembers the Raptors using a box-and-one in the 2019 finals to try and contain Steph Curry and force others to beat them. Even in the past, the Raptors have made games interesting, causing havoc with full court presses. It can flip a game, and it's both fun to watch and fun to play. To summarize, zones are good at stagnating teams by catching them off guard, especially out of timeouts and quarters. It also helps teams hide weaker links defensively. On the flip side, zone teams can struggle at rebounding, they tend to give up valuable shots, and lastly, scouting in the talent today prevents teams from going zone full time. As I mentioned before, it's a copycat league, so slowly but surely more teams will catch on and implement use of timely zones and other non-traditional defenses to keep teams guessing. You need intelligent personnel that can fly around and take up space, but that's the direction the league is headed in anyway. That's all I have for today. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe and drop a like. Also comment down below what future videos you'd like to see me cover. Until next time, peace.